Welcome to Wednesday nights. Wednesday nights at Bellshire midweek. Hopefully you guys are having a great week. Has anybody enjoyed the warmer weather? Yeah. Feels like spring. Of course, now that I'm saying that, once it's summer, I'm like, man, it's too hot. Jackson keeps asking me if the pools are opened. So he is very excited for warm weather. And he's excited for Wednesday nights. He's been running around here with one shoe on and one shoe off. I'm trying something a little different. Blocked off some of the back rows just because it makes it easier for me to see your faces, to talk. We'll try it just tonight. Don't get mad. And if you're online, you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. That's totally fine. But just something to make it easier for when we get into small group discussions. And so I'm not walking up and down the aisles. A couple of birthdays. First off, we were supposed to have a missionary tonight, but there is some flu and sickness going around. And they called me this morning and let me know that unfortunately they both, or one of them has the flu and they would not be able to make it. So we'll get that rescheduled. We're looking at next week or the week after that for them to come and speak to us. And so when that gets scheduled, depending on how they feel this coming week, I'll let you guys know. But for now, we'll continue with Nehemiah, and we're going to be in Nehemiah 4. But there's a couple of birthdays that I saw in the house. We have this Tuesday, we have Mindy's birthday, and then Friday is Savannah Spain's birthday. And so make sure if you see them, that's Mindy Charbalos. I don't know if I'm actually pronouncing that right. Probably not, but that is Tuesday, and then Savannah Spain is Friday. So make sure you tell them happy birthday. If I missed another one or an anniversary, I apologize. It wasn't intentional. Nehemiah 2:18 has been the theme verse, the key verse for our series. The handouts are on the end rows in these aisle sections, but Nehemiah 2:18 has been our theme verse for this entire series, and it says, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. Here's what I know. Whenever God calls you to something good, something meaningful, or something lasting, what you can expect is opposition. Expect obstacles, expect challenges, expect resistance, and not just the kind that you hear about or watch in Star Wars. Expect resistance. That was a terrible joke that just did this really bad. But don't back down, because if the enemy is fighting you, it means you're doing something that matters. You're doing a good work. You're doing something that is lasting and something that matters. And so the title of the message today, the reason we want you to take notes, the reason we have these handouts is when you write things down, it is far easier to remember and to recall what was heard and what is applied. So the message is titled today, Stand Tall in Spite of It All. Stand tall in spite of it all. I've been reading way too many Dr. Seuss books to my kids, and so it just kind of came to me right there. Will you guys pray with me? And I'll make sure there's no more Dr. Seuss rhymes unless it's green eggs and ham. That's one of my personal favorites. But we will dive into the word together. God, I thank you for who you are. I thank you that you're a great God, Father. That you're here in this place, that you're here watching online and being with everybody that's watching online. I pray, God, for every person. There's so many people that aren't feeling well, whether it's sinuses, sickness, flu. I pray that right now, wherever they are, Father, that you would heal their bodies, that you would help them to recover fast. God, you see our hospital report, our prayer requests. God, I pray that you be with every person that had surgery today or has surgery coming up or is still recovering from surgery. I pray that you'd heal their bodies, God. I pray that you'd open up our hearts and our minds to receive this word. Thank you for who you are. So we pray, amen. Now I'm sure this is probably all of us, but have you ever faced opposition? Like ever faced something challenging? Nobody raised their hand. You're all just mentally doing it. I've heard this story my entire life. I wasn't alive for it, so it's not like I was getting a point of view of it, but Thomas Edison had created the light bulb. And all my life, my teachers had taught about he tried 1,000 times and he didn't fail. He just learned 1,000 different ways not to do it. So as I studied this and I talking about opposition, to me, Thomas Edison is a good example of that. And maybe there's more to the story, but he had many of life's failures. This is what he would always kind of remind himself of. Many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. Thomas Edison was a renowned inventor, and he faced countless obstacles of his journey in the process of inventing the light bulb. His story provides a compelling example of perseverance through opposition. In his earlier experiments, Edison encountered significant failures. His first attempt at creating a working light bulb were disastrous. It took him thousands of attempts. But the reality is, to find just the filament alone, I read that it took 6,000 times. And it was a year after, in 1896, when he started it. In 1897, he found a bamboo element that was perfect, and it lasted 1,200 hours. I probably should have looked up how the average light bulb lasts now. LEDs probably last a whole lot longer. But he's quoted, and the quote that a lot of us know is, "I have not failed. I've just found 1,000 ways how not to do it." What we don't oftentimes think about is Thomas Edison was getting financially supported by other people. It wasn't just himself. There was people that believed in him, that he sold this vision to. But he was failing a lot. He was getting ridiculed a lot. He was getting made fun of a lot. But there's multiple times where people almost pulled his funding. But he kept going and he kept persistent. And so Thomas Edison would say this to himself. He reminded himself of this. And he would I have not failed. I've just found 1,000 ways how not to work it. Edison, determined as ever, would respond whenever he faced a challenge. We haven't failed. We've just learned more about what doesn't work. So he wouldn't let criticism, he wouldn't let failure, he wouldn't let anything stop him. He kept on going. He stayed persistent. He would remind himself again of this one: genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. So genius is 1% of a thought, but it's 99% of putting in the work, putting in the sweat, putting in the hours, putting in the time to do it. So just like Edison, when you and I step out in faith and start rebuilding, when we have a dream, when we have a vision and an inspiration, whether it's to fight for your marriage, to fight for your family, to overcome addiction, whatever it may be, the moment you step up, expect resistance. Expect opposition, because it's going to come. But remember, if you're facing resistance, you're on the right track. It doesn't mean that you've necessarily veered off. Great things don't come without opposition. The harder the battle, the greater the victory on the other side. Keep pressing forward and know that the opposition is often a sign that what you're doing matters. We see that in the Bible. Some of these characters that you've read your entire life, that you learned about in kids' church, that you saw on a felt board, that you watched in Veggie Tales. Adam and Eve had a serpent. Moses had Pharaoh, opposition. David had Goliath and Saul. Jesus had a whole lot. Jesus had Herod as a child. He had Pharisees. He had Jewish leaders, Judas, the devil, and demons. Batman had the Joker. That's not in the Bible. I just wanted to see if you were still with me after all that list. But Nehemiah had Sanballat and Tobiah. And we talked about them a little bit in Nehemiah 2, so 2 weeks ago. But we see from Nehemiah 4 to Nehemiah 6, 2 chapters. And these are happening pretty quick because, spoiler alert, they finished the wall in 52 days in the midst of opposition. But in 2 chapters, in Nehemiah 4 and Nehemiah 6, Sanballat and his squad, we see 90 times they tried different things to distract them. They faced criticism. They faced opposition. They faced death threats. They faced all these different things. That's just the 90 documented times. So a quick recap in case you've missed it. Nehemiah, he wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a builder. He wasn't a leader by trade, but he had a leadership heart and a leadership characteristics. He was a cupbearer and an ordinary guy with an extraordinary burden. He hears of the state of his homeland, a place that he had not even been to. But he hears of the state of his homeland, and it breaks him. And so for 4 months, he prays and he fasts and he seeks God, and he approaches King Artaxerxes with this plan because the king had saw him in the courtroom in the palace for the first time, sad. He's like, what is wrong? You're not sick. You don't have the flu. You're not a Vols fan, so you didn't lose to Kentucky. What's wrong? And he tells him, and the king gives him everything he needs. And so he has the journey. It's a 2-month journey. He gets there, he rests, and then he goes and he examines the wall at night. So he gave up his life of comfort. Nehemiah gives up his life of comfort in the palace and traveled over 1,000 miles, inspected the ruins, and rallied discouraged people and inspired them to attempt what seemed impossible. We see in Ezra 4 that they tried this once before and it just did not stick, that it did not happen. The group of people that he rallies around him, they're not masons, they're not contractors, they're not anything that would, carpenters that necessarily would know what to do and how to rebuild. They're goldsmiths, they're perfume makers, they're merchants and priests. But they picked up their tools and they started rebuilding. They started at the sheep's gate. They started at the fish gate. They started at the dung gate, which seems to be the most unfortunate name of all the gates. I would not want to live next to that gate. I'm just imagining that it smells very, very bad. But they did the horse gate, the valley gate, the water gate. Progress is beginning to happen. At this point in Nehemiah 4, we hear that half the wall, not like the entirety of the wall, but or like a portion of half of it, but up to like their waist had been complete. So like half of it, halfway up in the height, had been complete. Sanballat gets mad. But as they're building this, a shift has happened in their perspective, and it's kind of like, we can do this. And it's happening faster than we ever imagined possible. We've got this. So Nehemiah 4 comes in, verse 1 through 3. Sanballat was very angry when he learned that they were rebuilding the wall. He flew into a rage and mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and the Samaritan army officers, "What does this bunch of poor, feeble Jews think they're doing? Do they think they can build the wall in a single day by just offering a few sacrifices? Do they actually think they can make something of stones from a rubbish heap, and charred ones at that?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was standing beside him, remarked, "That stone wall would collapse if even a fox walked among the top of it." Why does this matter to Sanballat? Why is this so important? The Jewish people rebuilding their wall. He's not even from that town. He lived quite a ways away. He's from Beth Horon, which is 12 miles from Jerusalem. Tobiah, he's an Ammonite, and Geshem, the other one who's kind of in this group that is just rallying people to fight against them, to oppose them rebuilding for the glory of God. Sanballat was the main enemy, and he had an official position in Samaria. What you need to understand is the moment you step up and rebuild, we've already said this, but opposition will show up. When you start building, that's when the real battle begins. So why does this matter? Why is this such a big deal to Sanballat, who lived 14 miles away? Money. Abba said it best. The band. Money, money, money. Okay, we're going to keep going. Yeah, I know, I can't do it like that, though. But it's what it is. A powerful Jerusalem meant a weaker Samaria. Where Jerusalem is located, there's main riverways that would run right through that area. And so Jerusalem would be a connection to the north and a connection to Egypt. And if their walls are rebuilt, that means security for Jerusalem. That means security for the trade. And so when Jerusalem would be rebuilt, it means nobody would go through Samaria anymore. And it means no more money, money, money for Sanballat and his gang. So Sanballat had no choice but to try and stop the good work. We must understand this, that whatever God has called you to rebuild, do not be surprised when resistance shows up the moment you step forward, because the challenge is part of the journey. How do you respond to resistance? How do you respond to criticism? When somebody criticizes you for stepping up to rebuild for the glory of God, to have a passion to fight for your family, and somebody gets critical, how do you respond? When somebody gets critical because you're trying to overcome an addiction, you're trying to fix your finances, how do you respond to criticism? Because the challenge is part of the journey. When you do the right thing, I can promise you things are going to happen. I've been in church my entire life, and I've heard from friends that are in their 30s that try to go back to church for the first time in 20 years. And it's like the day they go to church, they had a flat tire, or they got in a massive argument on the way there, and then they put on this fake face, and then it's like, oh, okay, that was an experience. And they sit through the service just thinking about the argument they had. When you try to be obedient, I've had students all my years in youth ministry, even my life sometimes, when you try to be obedient, it's like that's the moment you seem to get tempted the most. When you're trying to get out of debt, that's the moment that your car breaks down. That's the moment that your kid needs braces, which all of my kids are going to need braces, at least 2 of them for sure. So I'm praying already for that. Maybe there's a quick redneck fix I can Google. Just put rubber bands on their mouth right now. Uh, but that's when everything seems to happen. You've been sitting in a seat in a pew your entire, for a year or your entire life in church, and you're like, you know what, I'm finally gonna serve. And you serve in kids ministry, and a kid pees on you. It's happened before to some people that have served in kids ministry. Or you serve in youth ministry, and a middle school kid that thinks they know everything tells you all they know, and they smart off to you in a small group. Obstacles happen when you step into obedience, when you try to do the good work. We mentioned this in Nehemiah chapter 4 through 6. It details 90 different tactics that Sanballat tried, 90 different ways to stop the work of the wall. There was ridicule. And we saw it from the very first thing. What do these feeble Jews think? What do these weak people think? What do these almost dying people think they can do? There was plots of war. There was plots of death. There was difficulties within. There was discouragement and fear. 90 different attempts to stop them. And when it didn't work, they changed their strategy. And they went after Nehemiah. Because advancement always invites opposition. And this is what I've also come to learn. If you're not facing opposition, you're probably not even in a fight. What does that mean? If you're not facing any opposition from the enemy, he's probably not afraid of you. It's because you're not doing something right. I heard this from a buddy of mine who I would bring in and speak all the time to our students. He was one of our students' favorite people, and he was one of my favorite speakers because the person you saw on stage was the person off the stage. But he told our students, and it wasn't in his notes, it wasn't even the theme for the night, but he's like, here's what I want to challenge you. Live every single moment of your day like on your on hell's most wanted list. And he just began to talk, and some of our students were like, what? He's like, I want the devil to be so afraid of you that the only moment he feels like he can do anything is while you're asleep. Because you're obedient, because you're a follower of God, because you're living righteously, and over 90 different tactics that he tries to take you out from rebuilding God's good work, from starting a Bible study in your school or a Jesus club at work. He's terrified because nothing he tries can get to you. Here's something that I love about Nehemiah. We've talked about Nehemiah's leadership, but Nehemiah is not the only leader we see in this text. What about Sanballat? In Nehemiah 4, 1 through 3, Sanballat was very angry when he learned that we were rebuilding the wall, when they were rebuilding the wall. He flew into a rage and mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and the Samaritan army officers. John Maxwell has this axiom that leadership is influence. What I've been telling my kids the last couple of months is leadership is influence, but influence isn't always the best thing. Because there's leaders who can influence people to do the wrong things. That's still leadership. When you read Nehemiah 4, it doesn't say that the whole crowd joined in. It's one man. Nehemiah faced opposition from 3 different people, but the main person who is constantly in the entire text, the entire book, is Sanballat. Leadership is influence, but not all influence is good. If a leader is using their influence to tear people down, to hurt them, or to make you carry their weight, their anger, their frustration, their oppositions, or their fears, that's not leadership. That's manipulation. Manipulation is a lie of the enemy, but yet the Jews let manipulation get to them because some of them began to listen to the lies of the enemy because they thought they confused manipulation as leadership. Real leadership doesn't drag people backwards. It pulls them forward, closer to who God has called them to be. That's real leadership. And all of you have that because leadership is influence. What do we see in Nehemiah 4? Nehemiah 4, as we continue on in the text, Tobiah the Ammonite, who was standing beside him, remarked that stone wall would collapse if even a fox walked along the top of it. I'm just going to take a shot in the dark. Tobiah had some Northeast Tennessee Appalachian mountains in him because that sounds like something my grandpa would have said. But he says, then I prayed, hear us, our God, for we are being mocked. This is Nehemiah. May their scoffing fall back on their own heads, and may they themselves become captives in a foreign land. Do not ignore their guilt. Do not blot out their sins, for they have provoked you to anger here in front of the builders. At last, the wall was completed to half its height around the entire city, for the people had worked with enthusiasm. So Nehemiah and the people are facing constant criticism, but he doesn't answer to the critics. He didn't answer to Tobiah. He didn't answer to Sanballat. Instead, while he's hearing feeble Jews, a fox walking on half of that could tumble it to the ground. Who are you as perfumers, as goldsmiths, as priests to think you could rebuild this entire city with walls that have been destroyed and burned? He doesn't stop and answer. He stops and prays. Too many of us, we get our fist all ready for a fight before we've ever prayed. He pauses to pray, and then he gets back to work. And when opposition comes again, he pauses to pray, and then he gets back to work. Prayer cannot be, if you understand that opposition is going to come, if you understand that the moment you step up and say, God, here I am, I'm ready to do a good work, the fight has began. Prayer cannot be a just wait until you're in the heat of it. It has to be a pause and pray, keep building, pause and pray, keep building. Pray while you work. Have the word of God in one hand and a chisel or a sword in the other, because a battle's coming. When the enemy throws mud, don't wrestle in the dirt. Instead, look up and call on the one who fights for you. So pray, get back to work. Another round of opposition means another moment of prayer, needs another moment for God's glory to be magnified, because instead of responding in anger, you pray to God. Pray as if everything, I've heard this my entire life, pray as if everything depends on God, work as if everything depends on us. There's multiple verses in the Bible. We're going to read one of them again here in a little bit. But they had built half the wall because the people had worked with enthusiasm. How hard is it for us to work with enthusiasm while you're being mocked and ridiculed? But they still worked with enthusiasm. They still had joy in their work, because pausing and praying, because of understanding that they weren't just rebuilding for them, but they were rebuilding for God's glory. Nehemiah 4:10-12 says, Then the people of Judah began to complain. The workers are getting tired, and there is so much rubble to be moved. We will never be able to build the wall by ourselves. So now things are starting to change because they've faced constant criticism. Meanwhile, our enemies were saying, before they know what's happening, we will swoop down on them and kill them and end their work. The Jews who lived near the enemy came and told us again and again, they will come from all directions and attack us. So of all the opposition, external haters, relational things, spiritual attacks, the most difficult to me and to them was the internal opposition. The people within the camp that started talking to each other and spreading all these different things. As a church, as a people, if you want to be able to continue doing the good work, don't let the voices of opposition drown out the voice of God. When the world shouts, let his truth speak louder. When people say you can't do something, remind them and remind yourself of what God has told you can do, of how he's gone before you, how he's fought for you. It's the same thing that Nehemiah was doing when the enemy was throwing mud, trying to smear him, trying to hurt him. He didn't wrestle with them in the dirt. He prayed. He looked up to God and he trusted, God has called me to do this. He's put a burden in me to do this, and I'm not going to let it stop me. In order to rebuild for God's glory, in order to rebuild your marriage, in order to overcome addictions, whatever it is you're trying to rebuild, you must let go of your insecurity and take hold of God's security. And I know that sounds cheesy. I just didn't know any other way to put it. Yourself, maybe this probably isn't y'all, but my self-talk sometimes, if that is louder than my prayer life time has been, than my devotional life has been, sometimes I let my self-talk beat out what God is trying to say, because I've spent more time thinking and less time praying. And the only way to let go of our insecurity of, oh, I can't build this wall. I'm not qualified enough. I'm not a blacksmith. I'm not a mason. I'm just a perfumer. The only way to do that is to know why God called you to it, what he's put in you, and that you're rebuilding for his glory. The moment Nehemiah started to battle his own insecurities, he takes his focus off of himself and he puts it back on God and the mission, and he's reminding his people, he's reminding the people that were working with him that he was working right alongside what they were called to do. Nehemiah 4:14, then as I looked over the situation, I called together the nobles and the rest of the people and said to them, don't be afraid of the enemy. You got to remember, they're being told they're going to die multiple times over and over and over again, that they're going to be attacked from all angles. Don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Fight for the people that are doing the good work of rebuilding for God's glory with you. But start with remembering God. Who is he? What has he brought us from? What has he done in this short amount of time to help us rebuild a wall with people who aren't even masons or contractors, but they just saw a need? In the midst of threats and plans to kill the Jews, Nehemiah takes the perspective off of themselves and onto God. And he reminds them that this is not our battle, that God has gone before us and he will provide. 1 John 4:4 is a great one. It says, the Spirit who lives in you, the Spirit of God that lives in you is greater than the Spirit who lives in this world. That's one to remind yourself when you're facing an opposition, when you're facing an attack, when you're trying to rebuild your marriage, when you're trying to rebuild a life overcoming addiction. The Spirit of God that lives in you is greater than the one that lives in this world. Because the greater the opposition against you, oftentimes the greater the opportunity that God has given to fight for you. The story that can come from that. Remember the Lord and keep fighting. Fight for your marriage. Remember the Lord and keep fighting to pay off debt. Remember the Lord and keep fighting to overcome addiction. Remember the Lord and grab another brick and keep building your legacy, your family's legacy. Remember the Lord and keep fighting to rebuild for his glory, not yours. I don't want my life to be some platform that I try to build for myself. I'm not ever one to do that. I want to do anything and everything I can to reach people for Christ that are far from him, that have been hurt by him, that have given up on him, because no matter what their perspective is, he's never given up on them. And I know criticism will come, and criticism may knock us down, but it doesn't need to knock us out. Doesn't need to be like prime George Foreman and just hit you in the gut and you just like, I don't want to take that again. I'm just going to stay down. I don't want to get hurt. If you live a life in fear of criticism, you'll live a life in not doing much of anything. Because criticism is always going to come. Criticism is going to happen, but take a lesson from Nehemiah. He was steadfast and unmovable. J. Oswald Sanders wrote a book on spiritual leadership, and he focuses a lot on Nehemiah. And he says, no leader is exempt from criticism, and his humility will nowhere be seen more clearly than in the manner in which he accepts and reacts to it. How do you face criticism? When you're trying to do something, when you're trying to do something that God has put in your heart, something that's burdened you, and somebody says something, how do you face it? When you face criticism, do you let it knock you out from doing the good work, or do you pray, refocus, and keep building? But here's some of us sometimes can get so afraid of criticism, but criticism can actually be a really good thing if it's done the right way. And again, I've been raised in church my entire life. I'm a pastor's kid, and so I've seen criticism in every angle since I was a kid. There's a difference in criticism to cut and constructive criticism. Who are some people in your life that can give you open and honest constructive criticism? If you don't have that, there's a limit and a cap to what you can do and what you'll build, because you're not letting anybody speak life into you. Constructive criticism, when it comes from a genuine partner, somebody who loves you, somebody who cares for you and is in support of your work, whatever the good work is, it can benefit you. Positive critics are motivated by desire to help and not hinder you. They advance the mission of rebuilding for God's glory and not their own glory. They share their concerns in a humble, respectful, and tactful tone. If you need help with that, the greatest advice I've ever been given was from our church in Montana. They sought feedback. I'm somebody who seeks feedback, but I want to make sure you're doing it in the right way because I try my best to do it in the right way. If you're just trying to cut me, I'm probably not going to listen. But in Montana, they taught us before you ever are quick to give somebody criticism, tell them what they're doing well. Put it in a positive tone. Be like, hey, you really do a great job with this. But I've seen this in you. This could work a little differently. Can I ask why you do it this way? Can I ask what your preparation is? Whatever it may be. And then end it with a positive, like if you could just fix that. And I'm here for you if you have any questions, whatever that may be. Who are some people in your life? Because constructive criticism matters. When you come with constructive criticism, do not just spout the criticism. Use tact. Speak of what the leader does good. Share what you see and remind them of what they're not doing well. So they will want to keep building and not just feel like criticism knocked them out. Positive, negative, positive. So the question I have for myself, the question I have for you is who are your most trusted constructive critics? Who are people in your life that will be honest with you, that you won't get mad at and be like, oh, I'm not going to talk to them for like 4 months. But you'll go back to them and say, hey, I listened and I applied. What's your feedback now? Make sure your tone is a little bit better than that because that part sounded kind of rude, at least in my head. What's your feedback now? Why are they? Why is that person a trusted constructive critic of yours? What are their mannerisms? What are their methods? And what are their motives? Because if you're looking for more, if you can answer that question, you'll be able to find more people in your life that you trust. And you can be like, hey, I need your help on this. I want to be a better parent. Can you just watch the way I parent my kids? I've seen how you parent your kids, and I need to learn from you. 1 Corinthians 15:58. So, my dear brothers and sisters, be strong and immovable. Always work enthusiastically. Remember we talked about Nehemiah 4, and they worked with enthusiasm to complete the wall. 1 Corinthians is another parallel to that, 15:58. So, my dear brothers and sisters, be strong and immovable. Always work enthusiastically for the Lord, for you know that nothing you do for the Lord is ever useless. In the midst of consistent opposition, Nehemiah and the people worked enthusiastically and rebuilt the wall in 52 days. Like, that's incredible. I'm sure there's probably something on the History Channel that said ancient aliens built that. But 52 days, God's people who worked with enthusiasm were strong and immovable in the midst of opposition, in the midst of threats for their life. And there was moments where they doubted, moments where they questioned, but they continued to do the good work, to rebuild for God's glory. Stand tall in spite of it all. No matter what you face, no matter what you oppose, stand tall. Remember, if you're facing resistance, it's a sign that God is doing something powerful through you. Not that he's done with you, but he wants to do a good work in you. So don't give up. Keep building. Keep fighting. Keep pressing forward. The work may seem impossible, but the God of all things wants to do a good work in you. Don't let criticism knock you out. Don't let somebody's cutting remarks or an internet troll stop you from doing what God has called you to do. Because if you're saying yes and you're stepping forward, opposition is going to come. What are you going to do when you face a criticism? What are you going to do when you face a challenge? Just like Sanders said, J. Oswald Sanders, no leader is exempt from criticism, and his humility will nowhere be seen more clearly than in the manner in which he accepts and reacts to it. Leadership is influence. Nehemiah was a leader, but so is Sanballat. How do you handle criticism? How do you handle opposition? 5 questions I want you guys to talk about, and I'll give you 10 minutes. Didn't seem to be enough last time, so I'll give you 12 minutes. That good? 12 minutes? Fine. 13 and a half minutes. I'm going to put it on there right there. 13 minutes and 30 seconds. 5 questions. They're on the paper as well. Then there's 3 self-reflection questions. The questions that you don't have to raise your hand and answer these out loud, but these are ones just for you to look out, the self-reflection questions. The first one is, am I letting external opposition drown out God's voice? How can I focus more on his truth instead of my insecurities? And then number two, how do I typically respond to criticism when doing the right thing? And what can I do better next time? And the third one, what areas of my life am I rebuilding? And how can I stay steadfast through challenges? So those are ones just for you. Those 5 response questions are some to talk about. Get in some circles, meet some people that you're not sure who they are, haven't talked to them in a long time, and we'll come back together in 13 and a half minutes. build, and what opposition have you faced? I don't have to get too crazy specific if you don't want to on the dream, but what is some opposition you faced and how did you overcome it? Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely. Ditto. Yeah, and the entire process, even before Nehemiah was just put on my heart, and so I just really studied Nehemiah, and I know my heart is always honor, always honor. I'm going to honor every person, leader, pastor, servant, volunteer. I mean, 72 years and two pastors. To be the third one is an incredible opportunity and honor. It kind of hurt a little bit. Sorry, that's the middle child in me. I just had to do things to get my parents' attention, just to know that I was still visible. But I know there's opposition, and I know I've already faced opposition. But I know what God has called us to do, and I know what God has called me to do, and I know I might do it differently. But my heart is always to build something for His glory, and I will always honor the saints of the past, but with an eye towards reaching people who have given up on church, reaching people who are far from church, reaching prodigals, like we talked about this last week. I mean, I know my kids are young, and Cruz will scare me every now and again with the statement of saying I don't want to go to heaven because the Holy Ghost is up there. I pray that this doesn't happen, but I know there's pastors, friends of mine that do, that their kids have walked away from the faith. But I'm going to preach every message on this platform or this floor, that platform, and everyone outside of this, like my kids is on the back row giving God one more chance. And I know we faced opposition, and I know there's opposition, and I know there's criticism. But at the end of the day, I don't answer to the critics, I answer to God. And they can talk all they want, but I know God's doing something in this church and in this body. That's a little more than I wanted to go in, but anything else? Appreciate that. Appreciate that, man. You're gonna make me cry in front of everybody right now. Number two, before I cry, um, how do you handle criticism or opposition, and what can Nehemiah's response teach us? What do you think? Try to pray before you react. Yep. Middle school Nathan did not do that. He thought he was tough, and I tried to get in fights. Yeah, yeah, that's very good. Very good. Yeah, it's really simple to jump in and be reactive, but trying not to be as reactive. That's very good and very, very hard to do. What do you teach? I think Nehemiah's responses. I mean, you can be honest if you've read ahead or if you read the text before, but just the way he handled himself. Like, to be honest, that we need more men like Nehemiah, not just leaders. We need more men and women that handle. They don't just react; they pray before they react. Like, sometimes when somebody says something to me, my dad is super sarcastic, and so I grew up being very sarcastic and had to be quick on my feet. and I can make people cry. But I've learned over time to not just respond when somebody tried to cut me with criticism, but to take a second to stop and pray and just listen. Like, is there any truth into that? God, is this you somehow weirdly trying to talk to me? And then just being quick to that. Anything else on how to handle criticism? If not, we'll jump to number 3. How have internal insecurities derailed your progress? And how can your response how can you refocus on God's mission? I need to take a mental note to not do white again. It's hard to read it on this TV. I don't know if it is back there. Anything on number 3? How have internal insecurities derailed your progress, and how can you refocus on God's mission? I know for me, if I have 21 days of prayer, I talked about this with Bobby. I know it's early, and I know not everybody could be here, but hopefully at some point you were praying throughout the day. But what I love in 21 days of prayer and fasting is when I would come here every morning. And it didn't matter if there was 3 of us or 15 of us. It just was a complete refocus. Like, there's things sometimes when life gets busy, trying to sell our house, that is the most stressful thing in the world. And then not sure what these people are going to ask. And then just like they could back out. They could do all these different things. And what I noticed is if I missed spending time in the Word of God, if I missed praying, whether it was in this season or out of it, my focus is not on what he's trying to speak to me and what he's trying to lead me, but I begin to pay attention to other things. And my temper gets a little less patient and less Christ-like. And people will cut me off in traffic, and thankfully I don't have a Belshire bumper sticker, but I'll just be like, oh! But that, for me, if I'm not in God's Word, and I'm not getting my security from a child of God and knowing that he's called me and made me fearfully and wonderfully made and given me a vision, I'll start focusing on other things. And so for me, it's just making sure that Jesus is at the center. I'm not going to preach from this thing anymore, but Jesus is at the center of it all. Yeah, that's good. Pray, fast, meditate from his word. Okay. All right, we'll jump into number 4. When have you had to stand tall in spite of it all? My best attempt to be Dr. Seuss. And what helped you overcome it? So when have you had to stand tall in spite of opposition, in spite of criticism, and what helped you overcome that? I guess it's a little similar question. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Faith and trusting in God in circle. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a statement that it's not just youth pastors, but so many pastors make, so many teachers I've heard make. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. It really does matter at any age. It's important for Gen Alpha and Gen Z behind us, but even now today, more still, like, who are you running with? Because if, again, leadership is influence, there's sandblots out there who might rebuild differently or who don't want you to rebuild because it's better for their financial benefit or all these different things in that context. To where if you hang around with them, you're going to take on that same negativity or that same perspective. But no, that's huge. Anything else on number 4? Yeah. 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 That's great, JoJo. Even better than your vocals this last Sunday. Did an awesome job. And then number 5, last one, and we'll talk a little bit more, and I'll say some of the announcements that are coming up. Nehemiah answered to God, not his critics. How can we apply this when facing opposition? I guess the answer is in the first part of that question. This is why I was not a very good teacher um, in high school. But anything other than the Sunday school Wednesday night answer, Nehemiah answered to God, not his critics. How can we apply this when facing opposition? There's really not any other answer to that one. I should have came up with a better question on that one, but it doesn't always mean it's easy. Because we've already talked through that, is when you face criticism, the human nature in you, the flesh nature wants to fight, but the Spirit produces love, joy, goodness, kindness, gentleness, and self-control. And that's how we handle opposition, is being more like the fruits of the Spirit and not the fruits of flesh. Before we jump into announcements, I just wanted to shout out, I know a lot of things were said, but was it yesterday or today? 2 days ago, it's Northeast Tennessee math. 2 days ago is 3 months that my family and I have been here. And leading up to this, I am thankful for each and every one of you guys. Y'all are amazing. We have an incredible church, and I'm excited for all that God has for it in 2025 as we rebuild for his glory. But I'm also very thankful for the board. I know there's some sick tonight, but you have an incredible board of people that love you and that love this church and want to rebuild for his glory. So I'm thankful to do life with every person, every volunteer, and each and every one of you. I've inputted all of your one more people that you're praying for salvation into my computer. I did that as soon as Sunday service was over. I've been praying over those. I'll find a nice, clean way to put those into a document for people to see that and pray over. And then I'll have it up on that one. So every time any communicator is preaching, there's names around of people that we're hoping will come to find Jesus. We have a couple of different things coming up. If you did not know, the NFL is scripted. Roger Goodell, if you're watching this, it's scripted and it's clear. The last 5 years, the logo just happens to be the same team that is in the Super Bowl. We now know who will all be watching February 9th. That is Patrick Mahomes and the Philadelphia Eagles. The game starts at 5:30 Eastern time, I think. And so it'll be 4:30 is when the game starts. If you want to come, you can bring some food. We'll buy some pizza and some wings. If you guys want to bring some drinks, I'll give you like a breakdown to make it a little bit easier. Like your name's A through K, bring drinks and sides. If it's L through Z, you can bring some dessert. And what's another good one? Just dessert. Dessert's the best one. And I've been trying to figure out what the footballs are in the middle. Brownies. That makes way more sense than what I thought it was. When I looked at it really quickly Sunday, I thought it was like a weirdly shaped, like undercooked hamburger. And then my mind went to like beef tartare, which I've never been brave enough to try, like the uncooked beef with like eggs. Oh, I think I would get sick. I can't do that. But that is coming up February 9th, and I can't skip this. Otherwise, I'll be sleeping on my couch. But February 8th, Galentine's, 5 p.m. right here. There's a QR code. They're in the seats. This is for anybody, if you're watching on, well, not anybody. This is for any lady, and it's upside down, in the house. If you have friends that don't go to Belshire, they can attend. But it's going to be an awesome time just listening to everything they're doing. I know Miss Martha is making something. I think it's, am I allowed to tell this or no? Yeah, I know what it is. She told me what she was making. Yeah. She's doing like, my mom used to make these. She would dip strawberries in white chocolate and then dip the sides in dark chocolate and then make bow ties. That's what she told me last Sunday or 2 Sundays ago. She might surprise me and do something else, but I told her before it gets to them, it needs to come to me to test it. Um, yeah, to confuse everybody. And then February 15th, 50 and up is a bingo. I think that is right here, 11 a.m. at the church. And I know the students are doing bingo too, because apparently they get a little salty that you guys get to have bingo and they don't. I know. I'm not 50, but I might just be there. And then I am still fairly new to the Tennessee district, even though I grew up in Tennessee. Somehow I missed, up until a couple of days ago, Sunday to be exact, I missed the men's conference. And so I was going to get with you guys and just kind of put that out there. March 9th here in town at Camp Jackson is the men's conference. And so we'll put some signups up there and we'll take some guys to that. You can stay there on site or you can go back home every night and sleep in your bed. Depending on how rowdy my kids are is what my registration will be. But that is some of the things that are coming up. This Sunday we start a brand new series. It is a shorter series, but I hope you are there. It's called The Vow. And then February 16th we have Save One. Jack Harper will be here with us that Sunday. Love you guys so much. Have a blessed Sunday night. Get you something good. It is, or Wednesday night, sorry. I'm going back to my childhood. It is, what, is it still 50 degrees outside? 46. Go get you some ice cream. There you go. All right, have a blessed night, guys.